Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Mobile Application Security Threats Through the Eyes of the Attacker with Jason Haddix here. My name is Peyton and I'll be moderating. We encourage you to interact with Jason. You can type in questions and comments using the questions pane. Please do submit questions throughout the webcast and we will have time afterwards to answer all those. We'll also be recording the session and it should be available to watch or listen to this afternoon. Now on to our speaker. Jason Haddix is our Director of Technical Operations here at BugCrowd. He trains and works with our internal AppSec engineers to triage and validate all our mobile web and IoT vulnerabilities. He also works closely with our researchers. His interests and areas of expertise include mobile pen testing, black box web app auditing, network security assessments, binary reverse engineering, and static analysis. He's also a top contributor to the OWASP Mobile Security Project. All right, Jason, please take it away.
Great. Hey, thanks, Peyton, for the introduction. It's a mouthful. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jason. I do a lot of mobile work here, and I work with the BugCrowd team here, doing a lot of mobile assessments through our work at BugCrowd, doing crowdsourced pen testing, and with our researchers. So today we're going to go over some mobile security stuff. Here's our basically loose agenda that we're going to cover today. And if you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the questions or chat box, and Peyton will bring them up throughout the presentation or hold them till the end where maybe I might have covered one through a slide or something like that. So our agenda today is going to be talking about mobile application security and basically the prevalence of mobile everywhere. The adoption rate and how basically point it is to go ahead and start thinking about mobile application security if you haven't already. And then we're going to identify some of the top risks in mobile apps, and we're going to do that by looking at the OWASP Mobile Top 10 project. And then we're going to cover what I think are the big three with mobile application security. They will be data protection at rest, data protection in transit, and then server-side security for mobile applications. And so we're going to go over these three things in depth and give you as many resources that you can take back to your security team should you be doing this type of work, and also kind of explain the threats and scenarios as much as we can there. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So thank you very much for coming this morning, and hopefully you enjoy it. So a little bit about mobile computing. Basically, mobile is computing nowadays. Most of the web traffic that is going across, or most of the traffic that's going across our routers and switches these days is mobile. We're 1.2 million mobile users right now, and that's going to be 5 billion by 2018. It's growing way faster than web, especially with the adoption of like IoT devices. And we're not just talking about phones here. We're talking about tablets, anything that's connected to the web and a cell or carrier network, anything like that. And we're switching over to the idea that we're going to do mobile payments. And then no one can forget about all of the wearables that are now coming out too, the Apple Watches and the Fitbits and things like that. And all of these things are going to be tied into your banking and your credit, and also paying with certain types of currency. And so it's really important to start thinking about mobile application security. So since this is so prevalent now, and since mobile is everywhere, really the attackers follow where the users are. So there's been a ton of press around mobile application hacks or information leakage, or things that have happened. You follow the news, you've seen some people have actually gone to jail for attacking the server side. The Weave trial case where he attacked AT&T, he went to prison for almost a year for attacking the mobile backend of AT&T's infrastructure. And so really attackers are following this trend. They face some hurdles that normal web application hackers don't, but they're ingenious, and they do kind of overcome these things. So we're going to start looking through these slides about the ways that they look at your mobile apps, and then the ways that your security assessment people can do the same type of work and find the flaws, as well as any type of development staff that you have that works with your mobile applications, how they can secure some of these things. So this slide is a representation of the OWASP Mobile Top 10 project, and the link for this project is down at the bottom of the slides. And it's basically 10 categories of mobile application security flaws that have been written up and basically stylized here for you to view. So today we're going to cover what I consider the big three, but you see that four are highlighted here. Really, two kind of bleed together, M2 and M4. Insecure data storage and unintended data leakage. So those bleed together a lot of the time. It's basically about storing data in a bad way on your phone. But you can use this project, the OWASP Mobile Top 10 project, to kind of get a feel for all of the vulnerabilities that could be present in a mobile application that you've developed. So you have the link there at the bottom of the slide to go check this out. Not only do you get the categories when you visit the project, but you also get full-length page write-ups about how these represent themselves in different platforms, like in iOS and in Android. Maybe some developer information around some of these things. So this is really a great resource for anybody who's doing mobile security to follow. This version you're looking at right here is the 2014 draft of the OWASP Mobile Top 10. And there looks to be a big shift in some of these vulnerability names in 2015, and I'm part of that project, as well as some really other smart people from other consultancies all over the United States and Europe and all over the world, really contributing data to try to figure out the mobile app problem and where we can secure it and how we can best evangelize it for everyone who needs to secure mobile apps. So like I said, the orange ones today are the ones we're going to look at, which is weak server-side controls, and then insecure data storage, insufficient transport layer protection, and unintended data leakage. And we'll explain each one of these in a little bit of depth and talk about them so you can basically get a feel for how they represent in your applications or how they might represent in your applications. So the first one we're going to start off with is data storage. So one part of data storage is taking a look at your mobile operating system and realizing what it's doing with your files and sensitive data. The screenshot here at the bottom basically represents a pretty common vulnerability where you have some kind of password or credentials, and here you can see basically there's a credentials.sqlite file here, and it has a password in it, and it's in clear text, and in this case it's not encrypted. So this is pretty indicative of how mobile apps work these days. A lot of them don't encrypt data that's on the phone itself. And so you're probably thinking, well, how would someone get that data? Aren't apps supposed to be segregated, and aren't they supposed to be not have access to each other on these platforms, iOS and Android? That's true for the most part. Some of these areas actually other apps can get to. And other areas it would require an attacker to actually steal your employee's phone or your phone to get access to these. And then the next logical question is, well, I have a PIN number that they need to bypass, right? And so over the last year, we've actually seen an increase in PIN attacks, how to brute force those attacks, how to bypass those PIN screens on both iOS and Android. So you can't 100% rely on that protection in the scenario of a stolen device. So on iOS, when you're looking at unintended data leakage or data being stored in a bad way, you're really looking at about 6 key places that you want to go over first. And this is where attackers will kind of look to go to. So in an application, you can set logging up for your application. And the logging for iOS applications is phone-wide. So any application can read the logs. And a lot of applications fall into this trap of logging very verbosely, and other logs or other applications will pick up this data and send it to their server and read it. So a common scenario here is maybe even a benign company. Let's say we have Bob's Bait Shack, and they just have a mobile app to sell bait, right? But they are using an ad or analytics library and putting it in their app, and then your app is verbosely logging. So without them even knowing, they're picking up the logs off of the phone because of that ad or analytics library that they put in their app and sending it to their analytics company. And this represents a data leak for you. If you're logging sensitive information like passwords, or you're logging the HTTP requests that your application is making, those are readable by any other app on the phone. So that's the first place that that you want to look at when looking on the iOS side. So when you're looking in production in your mobile application, you can look for NS log calls in your application, and so you want to start looking for those things. Um, some other things about leaking data are how iOS handles um, backgrounding your app. So if you've ever hit the home button on your application, it does that fancy animation in iOS and then puts you at the home screen. And in order to do that fancy animation, it takes a screenshot of the current app you're on so that when you want to come back to that app later, it can load it quicker. And that picture, if you were on a screen with sensitive data, let's say you were in your banking app, that image gets located on or gets placed on the file system. And so that's a place where you can leak potential data. There's also the idea of that when you are doing requests with your mobile app to the web server that it might be talking to, let's say your bank or something like that, some mobile applications cache that communication in a database file. And if this database file isn't properly protected with data encryption, all of your passwords that go across the wire are stored in this database and people can just pull it out. It's very similar to what the screenshot shows here. There's two other caching vulnerabilities that are very indicative here, keyboard press caching and copy paste caching. And on iOS, basically, whenever you type into your phone, it wants to do your predictive text, predict the word you're about to say, so you can go ahead and press the button on the top ribbon there and finish the word without actually typing it. In order to do that, it's actually storing those key presses that you've done so far to do analysis on them. And the same thing when you copy text, it has to put that text somewhere in a buffer to do that copy and pasting. So these two kind of caches are available on your phone, and sensitive data can end up there depending on what you're doing with your application. And then the last one is photo sharing, where if you've ever had an application that allows you to take photos, if they're private photos and they're photos you don't think should be shared with every other application on your phone, a lot of applications do this incorrectly. They will put private applications in the shared space for all photos on your phone, where they should be actually storing them away from those photos so other applications can't pick them up or send them somewhere else. So that's the iOS side, and all of these vulnerabilities are something that people look for when they're doing a mobile application assessment, and you can actually read pointed recommendations on how to work against these and some of the resources we're going to show later on. Android is a whole other world. Some of the Android versus iOS security features are better or worse. One's not super great or better than the other, but they suffer from some of the same things. Logging across the whole phone is available to all apps. URL caching, which iOS has as well, which I've already explained, and then content providers, basically apps that need to talk to each other, leaking sensitive data. So these are some of the things you need to look at when you're thinking about data that's getting stored on the phone, and what kind of attack scenarios are supported in trying to get this data. So this is an example of one of those vulnerabilities here. You can ignore like the application it's in and everything, and the text is is kind of unreadable. But basically, what's going on here is that there has been a database file that's been stored on the file system of your phone. Depending on which version of iOS and how strong your PIN code is, anybody who steals your phone can grab this file. And it basically contains information about your account, your email address, and everything like that. And so this was an application that was related to payments, and so it was publicly disclosed, and the vendor has since patched it. And so this is a good one to kind of show you how simple it is just to pull this stuff off. All it is a file. Someone pulled it off. It was unencrypted, and now they can read that data. So how do we protect against this? So if at all possible, don't store passwords or personally identifiable information. So that's kind of the golden rule for most applications that you write. When you don't have to handle those things and store them on the client side for use later, don't do it. But there are several storage mechanisms for each platform, iOS and Android, that you can use that are safer than others. So for iOS, you want to use the keychain for any small data fragments. Never use what's called a plist or the API call NS user defaults for storing data. These are just two tips right off the bat that can help you manage passwords a little bit better. For larger data stuff on iOS, you want to if you're going to use core data or an SQLite file to store this application data, you're going to want to use Apple's data protection API, and they can basically set levels on how that application that application data gets encrypted. And so the minimum level there that you want to set with the Apple data protection API is NS file protection complete unless open. And what that means is the file is actually encrypted until the application is opened. So that's the minimum you want to set on a file that has sensitive data in it. For Android, you want to use the Android key store with crypted values. The same with the iOS keychain. Don't just put your passwords in plain text. Put them in an hashed or encrypted value in the keychain, so that way if someone does get access to your keychain, they still don't have your verbatim passwords or keys that you're using for your application. And then avoid saving any data to the SD card. So these are some simple tips that you can send to your dev team, and we have very more verbose documentation later to look at these type of things. So that's kind of the sensitive data area of mobile applications. So now we're going to talk about encrypting and protecting traffic in transit. So some common vulnerabilities in mobile applications basically go around sending data, sensitive data of all kinds, across non-encrypted channels. And this is the same for web applications too, but it's very prevalent in mobile applications because you're not just dealing with one server. So here you can see that we're looking at some traffic here. The red is what was sent and the blue is what was sent back from the server. And basically a password was sent over HTTP and not HTTPS. That's what's being represented in this image, which is bad, right? And not only do you have to worry about your server having HTTPS, but now you have to worry about several servers running HTTPS, because in your mobile application, no doubt you've enabled adder analytics libraries. These are commonplace to run in any mobile application to get some kind of data as to who's using your app and how often it's being used and how you can make it better. And that's great. Oftentimes, though, those servers aren't using HTTPS. So if you're passing sensitive data and they want analytics on that data, you're actually exposing your customers to a lot of risk by your application data getting sent to a third party. Their session tokens, their passwords, any sensitive information, images, depending on what your adder analytics library can do and is what it's set to pull back, you're actually leaking data from your mobile app. And that's been represented a couple times in the media already this year. So over the wire, some recommendations for basically setting up secure communications. So when an application runs, it'll probably be talking to multiple servers. About 50% of the time, it's going to be using an untrusted network. What this means is, your home network might be secure enough, your business network might be secure enough, but when you go out to Starbucks or are connecting to a friend's wireless or a wireless that you just happen to need to use for an emergency, these aren't always protected very well, so people can get in the middle of your traffic. So it's really important to use HTTPS on all endpoints, even your ad and analytics ones, and disable all HTTP endpoints. So you also need to set your cookies appropriately. In normal web application security, a lot of flaws are found with cookies. It's even more important with mobile applications to make sure your cookies are set right to secure and HTTP only. And you also want to use the highest cipher strength for your SSL. All of these configurations can be tested for and remediated using common application security tools once you find all the endpoints your mobile app might be talking to. And an attacker will usually go after these type of vulnerabilities by trying to get in the middle of your phone and the web server it's talking to. So a lot of attackers will sit on the Starbucks Wi-Fi and try to pull down traffic that's unencrypted using super easy to use tools. These aren't complex tools that hackers are using to try to pull this data down, but having HTTPS helps mitigate that control or that attack that they're using. So there are some good resources here. When you do HTTPS, you might want to consider using certificate pinning, which makes it so that your application will only talk to some whitelisted servers that you have basically embedded a certificate with, and it will look at the certificate that you put in the application and compare it to the one that's on the website and only talk to those ones, that one or those ones. And so there's been some really good resources to bake in a library to do that, and that's that link on the bottom there, which is called SSL on Conservatory. Some other common transport layer issues are basically applications when they go across the wire and they connect to a web application, they see a certificate and it's not the one that they're expecting, but they trust it anyway. All of these things are testable for allowing the application to basically connect to a site that has an expired certificate, allow man-in-the-middle attacks through these two and previous stuff we've mentioned in the last slide. And so a lot of basically SSL vulnerabilities or common TLS implementations that are bad are represented in this guide here, this cheat sheet called the SSL checklist for penetration testers. And so when I do presentations like this, I like to provide developers and testers with the resources I would use to test for these things and mitigate them and figure out how we were going to fix the mobile application. So this is where I would go first to check out the server-side SSL connection for my mobile application, as well as some of the links already mentioned in the previous slide. So now we're going to talk about server-side protections. And you might be saying, well, server-side protections aren't the actual mobile app. And while that is true, there's a whole app running on your phone. I don't know of any mobile applications that don't connect to a backend. So the problem with mobile application backends or servers is that they're often underlooked when you develop these things. They get developed as like an API. Maybe they don't even have a real website associated to them. And they don't get as much security love as any other site would get. And this is a real problem because more people are using them. Attackers can find them. They're not hidden. A lot of people go into developing a mobile application and thinking that the backend will never be found by or used by anything other than the mobile application. And this simply isn't true. Attackers can very easily find that endpoint and start hacking it. So you have to start doing application security on these servers is basically the first go-to here. You have to validate all the input that comes in, just like any web application. There's not really a silver bullet to do AppSec 100% right, but there are some tools available to help you control these things, and we're going to represent a project we really like in the next slide. There are some open source web application firewalls that help you mitigate attacks on these as well that have been very industry vetted, so like Mod Security and the OWASP ES API and any IIS security modules that you can enable. All these things help protect against attacks on a website, and they should be enabled on the mobile endpoint as well as your primary flagship site. And then you have to start thinking about if you've built an API instead of a traditional website for this mobile application, you just have to start thinking about ways people can abuse that. Can one person access another person's data just by asking for it? Are there permissions enabled? Is there some type of authentication key? These are all things you have to be thinking about on the mobile backend as well. And these are the first things that an attacker will look for. He's going to basically download your app himself, him and herself, whoever's attacking it. They're going to get in the middle of that traffic and see what's going on between the mobile app and the backend server, and then pretend to be the mobile app and start trying to get other people's data. And that's usually the attack pattern that presents itself with mobile applications. And this has happened a ton of times already this year. You also want to make sure that your backend servers or the backends or the APIs or whatever you've set up, that the web server software is fully up to date and has a patch policy associated to it. This also includes like any parsing that it's doing. If it has a parsing library or something like that, you want to make sure those are up to date as well. There's been a lot of attacks against parsers recently, like XML parsers. And then if the back service is, if the backend service is a web service, you want to make sure you return the proper content type and cache control headers, so that the communication isn't being cached anywhere along the way of the transaction. And that nobody can do, cross-site scripting or JavaScript attacks against your API because you don't have the proper protections in place. And so this is kind of web security 101, and but some pointed things to do for your backend for your mobile application. A project we really like that goes along with this is called the OWASP Proactive Controls Project. It's run by a guy named Jim Manico. And instead of the OWASP Mobile Top 10, instead of the OWASP Top 10, which most of you have probably heard of before, which is 10 areas of vulnerabilities with risks associated to them that are commonly represented, this one goes over the 10 proactive controls, as its name basically indicates. And we like this project a lot because it's very pointed. It gives you development advice to go through for each one of these. how to parameterize your queries that are coming across in SQL, how to encode data, how to actually validate an input in several different languages, um, how to protect data, and some of the SSL stuff is represented in here. All of these are really good design areas, and Jim Manico leads this project with a whole bunch of input from the community, so it's constantly getting refreshed for every type of server. And you've probably already done a lot of these security measures in your flagship application, but it's good to go over this project as a resource and go over your mobile basically backends as well with the same kind of security standard that you would for your flagship application on your mobile backend. So like I said, I like to offer some resources for anybody who's going to be getting into this work, both the developer and the tester. And so if you are one of those, or you manage one of those, or you think you're about to get into this kind of stuff, I like to recommend the best resources out there to do this type of work. So the first one is when you start looking at the server-side traffic and the connections that are going across the wire, you're going to need to basically proxy your mobile application using a tool like Charles or Burp Suite, an application proxy. So here's a link using Charles, which is very simple to get started up on your Mac, and it's a tutorial on how to get in between your mobile app and the server and see all the traffic that's going across, and see what the SSL settings are, if any data is going across the wire and being leaked. And so there's a really easy to set up and great tutorial that Coding with Chris has done for this. And so the link there is at the bottom. And so if you've never worked with an application proxy before, or you've never proxied a mobile application, it's really fast to get set up with this tool. So this is one of the ones we like to basically start people off with so they can start looking at the traffic that's going across. This is definitely a tester tool, or developers can use it too. This project is called IDB, and this is the GUI representation of IDB, and it's done by a guy named Daniel Mayer. And so when you start looking for the data protection flaws that we talked about in slide 1, this is one of the easiest to use and easiest to get started with programs, basically. What it requires is for you to jailbreak a device. So you have to jailbreak a device you own, and then install your mobile application on that device. And IDB will then give you this GUI representation of the file system. It will load your app. It will automatically check it for some security vulnerabilities, including if the application itself is encrypted, if it has all of the exploit mitigations it should have. And then you can see at the top, there's a whole bunch of tabs that represent what you can look at. And so you can look at all the storage that's going on inside of your mobile app, and it tells you what the, this is for iOS, this is for the iOS world. It'll tell you what the data protection is in all of your files. It'll tell you if your application is trying to connect with other applications on the phone. It'll tell you what libraries you've baked in. It will give you any clear text strings. So if you're storing information in the application itself and you think it's hidden, it will tell you if it's visible to attackers. It gives a GUI representation of the file list, so you don't have to work on the command line right away. I know a lot of people are comfortable with the command line, and looking at maybe having a jailbroken device is very comfortable for you, but people who aren't comfortable on the command line can use this tool to get a visual representation of all the files and open them up. It supports SQL files, it supports XML files, the common type of stuff you'll see on the file system. It also has the ability to look at the logs that your application is sending, look at the keychain that's installed on your phone and tell you what this application is storing on the keychain and how it's storing it. And it also has the ability to check that copy-paste buffer and that image buffer and the photo buffers. It has all of these tools to help you do those things in a very easy manner. Probably the easiest you can find out there for any tool. And this is an open source tool. It's on GitHub. You can get your engineers started working with it, your developers started working with it. So anytime I teach a mobile class, if nobody's ever done mobile before, we start using IDB and then work downwards from there. If we need to do more in-depth analysis of an application, we work from this way down. So data storage and protecting data and all this stuff requires a lot of basically code to do, and so there are some better resources for protecting data at rest or in transit. There are some better testing testing references out there. So these are the ones I always like to give people to send to their staff. For the iOS side, the pointed link for how to use data protection classes to protect data at rest, something we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. That's the link there for using those, as well as the guide to encrypting core data. So those are two resources you just want to keep handy, as well as the iOS security guide, which is a complete guide that's refreshed every year by Apple on how to implement security controls in their newest version of iOS. So this year it'll be 8 and 9. So that's for the developer to kind of take a little bit, and then for the tester, if you're getting into testing or you're a QA person or something like that, IDB, obviously we just ran over, is a great tool to start with. The OWASP iOS testing cheat sheet, which I wrote part of, also has an updated list of all of the tools and open source security projects that deal with iOS testing. As well as a write-up of where you want to get started. Kind of like we've gone over the top 3 here, it goes over all 10. And so there's a lot of links and resources in that, as well as the OWASP mobile top 10 page itself that you can get started with. And so you want to check that out when you have some time and get comfortable installing those tools, or maybe do some reading up on those tools. And it's probably the one resource that you'll get started with, and then ask more questions, and dive in deeper. On the Android side, there's 2 really, really good secure coding manuals out there. As opposed to the iOS side, you only have what's given by the developer. Obviously, you have the Android developer documents, which isn't listed here, but hey, Peyton, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, looks like you cut out there for a minute.
No, no problem. Am I back on now?
You're back on. Everybody
Cool.
good? Yep.
Yeah, I think so. Cool.
Great.
Sorry about that. So I think I left off starting on the Android side. So on the Android side, basically, you have the Android developer documents, which are available for you to use, and those are really good. There's 2 extra resources. CERT has published a secure coding practices for Android section on their website, and then a Japanese conglomeration of tech companies has come together and made this manual on secure coding called jsec.org. These are kind of the 2 de facto Bibles for secure coding in Java or Android. So I really recommend these to anybody who's doing Android development. They're really great, especially the jsec.org one. It's probably the best reference I've ever seen on secure mobile coding ever. It is a thick book, a thick PDF, but a developer can go through it really quickly and just look at the things he needs, like protecting data at rest, or using the key store, or how to handle keys or stuff like that. It's all very pointed. There's code snippets for everything. It's really, really good, and I really like that project. I try to evangelize it whenever I can. So that's something you can take back to your developers for mitigating some of the vulnerabilities we talked about. And then for an Android tester, you're going to want to get comfortable using the Android debug bridge to look for some of the data protection stuff that we've been talking about. And then also Drozer is a toolkit for Android testing that a lot of people use, and it's probably one of the more simple ones. It is on the command line, so you're going to be using the command line. You're going to install Drozer in your development environment for your Android development or testing, and then you're going to have to get used to its syntax. But after you do, it provides the best tool set, kind of similar to IDB, to check for common vulnerabilities in Android applications. And it's the first tool that anybody getting into Android will want to spend their time doing, because it will yield the best results. So these are some resources to take back to your developers and testers, as well as there's some other ones obviously hyperlinked in the beginning of the presentation. It's a really good start to doing mobile application security and kind of mitigating the top 3 that we've looked at, that hackers will look at too as well when they take a stab at your app. So some of the takeaways are: start identifying those top 3. The second one is really keep a trained and staff development and assessment team in your organization. If you don't have the bandwidth to do that, that's totally okay. You can get an assessment team to do that for you, a third party one. Bug crowd has a lot of experience with mobile application assessment, as do I. So you can talk to us or email us about any kind of mobile problems you might have, especially if there's like a new iOS version and you just have questions about, is there anything I need to keep an eye out security-wise for these things? And then just utilize the provided resources, the guides, the cheat sheets, the blogs that are referenced in this presentation, and get a good feel for those to start off with, and you'll have mitigated probably like 60 to 75% of the very low-hanging fruit with these mobile applications. So that is the quick shell guide of how to do this kind of stuff and how attackers look for vulnerabilities and data leakage in your mobile applications. And finished a little bit early, but we have plenty of time for questions. So if anybody has any questions, we can go right into those.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason. Looks like we have some questions that have come in. Please continue to ask them, and we'll try to get to all of them in the next 10 minutes or so. So the first one we have here is, what are the areas or test cases to be focused during testing of Android or iOS apps as a black box approach if credentials are not provided?
So if credentials are not provided, a lot of the times if you just exercise the application up to the login screen, it will have to place data stores to get ready to receive data. And so like you can look on the file system and see if they're going to be placed in a place that is shared, like the SD card or something that we might have mentioned. So those are some test cases you want to look at right away. Without credentials, though, you really miss out on a lot of what we talked about in the presentation, right? Like when you're doing that testing, you're not going to be able to see if credentials are getting leaked to over HTTP or anything like that. The only indications you're going to get are up to the login screen. And so if it's using HTTP to load anything from the login screen, that might be a big indicator right away. If it's setting up storages that are insecure before you even put credentials in, that might be a thing. You might be able to bypass some logins and applications, and that's more of an in-depth thing when you get into Android testing, so you want to check for those things. But like I said, a lot of the stuff is set up pre you even logging in to receive and store that data instead of programmatically as you type in and press login. So you will still be able to do a little bit of it. I hope that answers that question.
I think so. Positive feedback. Let's see, lots of questions about a list of resources. We will be sure to send out a comprehensive list of everything Jason mentioned and then some, as well as the video. The video will be available after this, and we'll be sure to email to all of you guys, and it'll be available on our site as well.
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to make extra sure everybody knows that I am available through. A lot of people after a presentation will ignore, not get to emails that maybe you send in. If you guys have any mobile security questions, especially since it's a medium-sized group here, feel free to just send an email to my broadcast email or hit me up on Twitter, which I'm on pretty often. I talk about mobile security a lot, and I really love it. So if you guys have pointed questions that maybe I didn't cover, or errata, maybe something I said was out of date because of iOS 9 or something like that, let's talk about it. We also have a forum that we're going to be starting up associated to this webinar. So BugCrud has a forum where our security researchers go and talk about security questions. And so we'll post one for this webinar and the topics related to it, and you could post your questions there if you don't feel comfortable with email, or you want to get not just my view on some of this mobile stuff, but also some of our researchers are some of the best and brightest in the world, really. So you can go there and do that.
Looks like we have a couple more questions. What is the importance of knowing how to develop mobile apps when doing pen testing on them? Is knowing the underlying programming languages an advantage?
So it is. It's always an advantage to know the languages underneath what you're testing, and that's true in almost anything. That doesn't mean you can't do the work, though. There's plenty of QA resources or pen testers I know that don't know Objective-C or Swift, that don't know Java or Android, and still do this work really well because it's basically security fundamentals. Are they storing things badly without encryption? Are they transporting things badly without encryption? And are there web server vulnerabilities? And because those skill sets are all kind of Easter egg hunt type of skill sets, you can still find these vulnerabilities as long as you understand how to use the tools. And so following the resources that I laid out will really give you kind of a leg up on the rest of the people doing this because, in my opinion, they're some of the best resources. So no, you don't absolutely need it. It does help. Understanding the code level stuff is useful. So I myself, I'm not an iOS app developer, but I have looked at enough mobile apps. Let's take iOS for example, that I know the APIs that you need to use to make a secure connection or store data. And so just get really comfortable with those ones in specific and what their names are and how they are used. And you don't have to be a complete developer to know when you don't see those or when you do see those. So hopefully that answers that question. It's not a 100% thing, but it does help a lot.
Awesome. Okay, 2 more here. Is there a way to determine if an app, iOS, might be listening on Wi-Fi and broadcasting what it had heard back to the server via LTE?
So that's a good question. Um, it is definitely you would be definitely able to do it. The problem is it's not any conventional testing tool or suite that would be able to do it, right? So sniffing LTE traffic is completely different than sniffing traffic using like an application proxy like we did before. So it requires a different setup and maybe in some cases even different applications and hardware to sniff that data, the carrier data. So it's a more in-depth practice. But if you set up that practice, which there's some guides on, and maybe in the forum I can point one to you guys to see, to instead of just sniffing the application traffic that's coming out of your phone, to sniff all traffic that's going across all wireless points of your phone. If I can find some good resources and getting that set up, I'll put that there. And then you just want to sit on that and run your app and see, run your app with some sensitive information that's fake, and then you'll be able to see what's going out there. And if stuff is going out that fits the criteria for sensitive information to places you don't want it to go, or from interfaces that you don't want it to go, that's the first step in finding that kind of stuff. And like I said, there might be different tool sets associated with that. You might be working in Wireshark instead of an application proxy, or you might be working in some other tool set. But it is definitely possible. There is a test case for that.
Awesome. All right. Last question. Some mobile apps are using MQTT protocol. How to capture this traffic? Proxy tools like Burp, etc., only support HTTP, HTTPS.
That's almost the same exact answer to the previous question I gave. And that specific protocol, you're going to need to, we're going to need to find a resource like maybe almost a TCP or forwarding, TCP forward basically proxy to do that. There used to be a really cool one called, I can't remember. It was done by Intrepidus Group, and they made basically it was like a burp for TCP connections, and they went through all kinds of port forwarding or VPN services that you could do to forward all the traffic out of your phone to go to this like burp for TCP sessions, and then you could modify the bit stream for any application protocol. I think it was called Mallory. I don't know if it's still in development before, but there's probably some good resources for that right now. Those applications, I know that app developers are starting to use those. They're not the highest basically adopted protocols yet. So you might see your favorite tools actually support some of those things. Probably not Burp because Burp errs on the side of applications, but some of the mobile tools might include modules to start capturing this stuff pretty soon. So that would be another thing that we could follow up on the forum with and just kind of chat about. And if I have some resources, I know a ton of mobile testers too. So like if they have a resource too to grab that traffic or to maybe inspect that protocol or maybe even reverse engineer it, we could probably find some resources to do that.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up this webcast. Once again, we will be sending out this list of resources. The presentation will be up on our SlideShare, and the video and presentation will be emailed to you. Again, thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.